So it turns out that not all mediums agree about everything regarding mediumship. Probably the most controversial one for me is that some people really believe that you're either born a medium or you are not, that it is not a learnable skill. I could not disagree more. I'm sure that it's a learnable skill. And every time I've come across somebody who's insistent that it is you're born that way or you're not, those people are always from the United Kingdom. So it seems to be a cultural thing. Don't know what that's about, but that's my personal experience. Some people believe that if you're in a group, whether that's on Zoom or in person, and you go directly to someone and say, I have a woman for you, I know her name's Natalie, I'm pretty sure she was an attorney, that's the only way to do mediumship. Other people think if you do go directly like that you're reading the person psychically and you're not actually connecting with someone in spirit. So you kind of can't win either way there, because if you do it how I typically do it, which is to say, I know I have a woman with me, I know her name is Natalie, I'm sure she was involved in the law, probably an attorney, that they consider that phishing. So no way to win, but that's certainly an issue that comes up, even among mediums. Some mediums don't agree on that. A lot of these controversial things seem to be centered around catering to skeptics, which I'm just not willing to do. So, for example, I often, not always, but I often state things in the form of a question. Your mom is deceased, right? Yes. What's her name, Natalie? Yes. Was she an attorney? Yes. For me, that's not phishing. When someone immediately says yes to your question, that's not phishing. For me, phishing is your mom's name was Linda? No. It was Marie? No. It was Amanda? No. It was Natalie? Yes. That's phishing. So that's my opinion. But a lot of this, if you think about it as you watch this video, it seems to be to cater to skeptics. So kind of a biggie here in the United States is people talk about protection. You're opening yourself up to people in spirit, so you have to protect. This, in my experience, is a very American thing. Culturally, I am Latino and Native American, and I don't buy into this. So, and a lot of people I love and respect do. In my opinion, there are a lot worse people here in physical life than you will ever encounter people in spirit. And if there was such a thing as a bad person in spirit or some bad entity, I believe that my parents and grandparents and all of my ancestors before them are there helping me, protecting me, looking out for my well-being. So I don't even think about protection of any kind. It just doesn't occur to me. And it's not something that I think is necessary or that I agree with. Weirdly, a couple of people have insisted to me, a couple of mediums, that people in spirit never apologize in their messages or in their communications. I have literally said, I am sorry, or felt chagrin or felt remorse. I feel those words a little bit differently. Remorse, apologies, I'm sorry, regret. But I definitely have had those sentiments expressed through me by people in spirit. I'm not sure what that's about. Another curiously British thing is being anti-chakra. Some people, before they do a reading, they will open their chakras. And every time I've come across someone who's like, no, that's not a thing. They're always from the United Kingdom. So I have a British friend who's a medium. He says, if you're alive, your chakras are open. If you're dead, they're closed. That's it. And I don't think it's one or the other. I think the chakras can be expanded or contracted. Whether or not that has anything to do with how well a mediumship reading goes, I'm not sure about that. But I just don't have any strong feelings. And I'm surprised that that's a controversial thing. In my experience, most mediums are fairly liberal or extremely liberal. Some are quite politically conservative. Who knew? They're in the minority, but they certainly exist. And that's something to keep in mind, I think, as you are interacting with people. Don't just assume that everyone in the group is liberal. And then there's a lot of stuff related to your going psychic and reading your client psychically rather than connecting with the person in spirit. So some people say if you need to hear your client's voice, or if you do better when you hear your client's voice, you're reading them psychically. I don't agree, because I'm one of those people. It helps me to hear your voice. But I get things that my clients can't confirm, and they later confirm it with a grandparent or someone else who knows the person in spirit better, the person that came through. So that's definitely not reading my client psychically, because they didn't even know. So that's, I don't know, I don't think that's such a thing. A lot of people say if the medium is talking about current events, they're not connecting with a person in spirit, they're reading their client psychically. I think if you get a few things that are clearly mediumship, and then they say, oh, and this person tells me you're remodeling your kitchen or some part of your house, and that's correct. That's just people in spirit showing that they know what's going on in our lives currently. I think if the only thing the medium talks about is current events, then maybe they are just reading their client psychically. But that's if they're only talking about current events, is how I feel. Some people say if you get information about a living person instead of somebody, it turns out they're alive, that you're going psychic. This happens to be in a couple different ways. So sometimes I'll be sitting either in a in-person group or on a Zoom call, and I'll start describing someone, and someone in the audience will go, "That's me." And so when that happens, that's to get me to the right person in the group, and then someone comes through for them, always. Or what else can happen is I'll describe someone and someone will raise their hand and say, "That's my father-in-law, but he's very much alive," or "That's my whoever who's still living." And then it turns out the message is for them, comes through. So you can get messages for other people if you're a client. Sometimes that happens. That doesn't happen often, but it can happen. But if you've got this no, if it's a living person, you're going psychic and you cut it off, you never have the opportunity for the person in spirit to come through and communicate. Handling objects is kind of a big deal for a lot of people. That's called psychometry, when you read the energy of an object and get information off of that. I believe that that can happen. And so I kind of have my own unspoken rule that I never handle objects of people who have passed, or almost never handle objects. But I will say this. When I first started to do this, I was sitting in practice groups. There was an in-person group I used to go to. And one day we all decided to bring objects and see if that helped or not in connecting as a medium. So I brought a letter opener that I had used every Monday through Friday at work for 10 years, and that had belonged to my mom for the 20 years before that, and she used it every day at work. And we passed it around, and everyone in the group, and I didn't tell anyone, I just passed around this letter opener. Everyone in that group connected with my mom's parents. So it was all about my grandparents. And so maybe it did help them to connect, because I could have had any number of people. I have dozens of people in spirit. So I think it did help them to connect, but it was definitely not psychometry, because my grandparents, I'm sure, had never seen that letter opener, much less handled it. There's also this strange thing that says people in spirit can only use one clair at a time. So clairaudience is hearing things, clairvoyance is seeing things, clairsentience is that feeling or knowing? I get them confused. But that's not my experience. I don't think they have that limitation. So what can happen, and I think teachers say this to students to help them along, you often, especially in the beginning, can get two extremely similar people. So you're sitting in this group of, say, 10 people who are practicing on each other, and you get a man in his 50s who's an attorney who died of cancer, and two people can take it. Because you've got two people in spirit that all applies to. And so what I've heard some teachers say is, as you're trying to discern which client you're with, which sitter you're with, one person in spirit can only use clairaudience and the other can only use clairvoyance, for example. That isn't my experience. I don't think they have those limitations. I think they can use any combination of sensations to convey what they want. So I think it's for the comfort of the student, or just for the medium who approaches things that way. And then finally, before talking about next week's video, is some people say there's a certain amount of time after someone passes, you have to wait before they can communicate. I don't think there's any amount of time that you have to wait. Twice I've gotten someone really clearly and communicated a lot of stuff about them, and it turns out they were in a coma. They were still physically here, technically. And I had no idea that they were still here, except that the one person, I was giving all this information about her, and when I got to the message part, I said, I just feel this relief to be able to communicate this way. And that's when they told me, oh, she's in a coma right now. So there is no amount of time required. I think, again, this is for the medium's comfort, because it is easier not to deal with someone's fresh, immediate grief. And I've also found it a little more challenging to connect when someone has just lost somebody and they're deep in fresh grief. Or if someone's been passed for quite a while, but the client really desperately wants to hear from one person and one person only, it has been harder for me to connect. And what happens to me in those cases is I get a more obscure person in spirit, and then they bring forward the super desired person, the one desired by the client. So I think that's also for the medium's comfort. Next week, I'm going to talk about terminology that I am not comfortable with, mediumship terminology, like sitting in the power or blending with spirit. Wording really matters to me. So I word those two concepts and others differently than most. It's just a wording thing that got in my way, thinking about them in certain ways. So I'll talk about that. Tune in for that. And as always, leave your comments or questions below, and I will try to do a video answering them. Thank you.